Every 4 years, half the planet stops to watch 22 people kick a ball around a field. It's the most popular sport on Earth, bigger than religion in some towns. But it didn't start in a stadium. It didn't start with rules, referees, or even a round ball. It started as a way to settle scores between villages. Literally, people died playing this game. This is the real story of how football began. From ancient battlefields to Victorian schoolyards to the global obsession it is today. Let's go back, way back, over 2,000 years, to the Han Dynasty in China, around the 3rd century BC. There, soldiers played a game called Cuju, literally kickball. Cuju involved kicking a leather ball stuffed with feathers through a small opening in a net strung between 2 poles, without using your hands. Sound familiar? It was originally used as military fitness training, later becoming a form of entertainment for the imperial court, complete with professional players and organized leagues. Around the same era, other civilizations had their own kicking games. The ancient Greeks played episkairos, a rough team game involving a ball, though it leaned more on throwing and wrestling than kicking. The Romans had harpastum, a small ball game played on a rectangular field, brutal, physical, and popular with legionaries stationed across the empire. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Mesoamerican civilizations, the Maya and later the Aztecs, played a ritual ball game using a solid rubber ball, moved primarily with the hips. This wasn't just sport, it carried deep religious significance, and in some versions, the stakes were literally life and death. The direct ancestor of the modern game, though, comes from somewhere much colder and much muddier, medieval England. By the Middle Ages, a game had emerged across England and parts of France that historians now call mob football. There were almost no rules: kicking, punching, wrestling, tackling, all fair game. Matches could last all day and cover miles of open countryside, farmland, and village streets. Shops boarded up their windows on match day. Injuries were common. Deaths were not unheard of. This chaos got the attention of the English monarchy, and not in a good way. In 1314, King Edward II banned football in London, worried it was causing public disorder and distracting men from archery practice, which the crown considered essential for a national defense. Edward III, Richard II, and Henry IV all issued their own bans over the following century. None of them worked. The game was too popular, too embedded in local tradition, to legislate away. But mob football, for all its mayhem, planted the seed. It established the basic idea: 2 sides, a ball, a target. Everything after this is really just an argument about the rules. Fast forward to the early 1800s. England's elite private schools, confusingly called public schools, like Eton, Harrow, Rugby, and Winchester, had each been playing their own local version of football for generations, which meant, by this point, there wasn't one football, there were dozens. Some schools allowed handling the ball, some didn't. Some allowed hacking, that is, kicking an opponent in the shins, as a legitimate tactic. Some played on huge open fields. Others in tight cloisters between buildings, which produced a completely different style of game. The most famous divergence happened at Rugby School. Local legend holds that in 1823, a student named William Webb Ellis picked up the ball during a football match and ran with it toward the goal, breaking the conventions of the kicking game. Historians are skeptical this actually happened as described. The first written account didn't appear until decades later, but true or not, the story stuck, and it symbolizes a real split that was happening across English schools, a kicking tradition and a carrying tradition, slowly diverging. The real turning point came when these students went off to university. At Cambridge, young men from different schools, all convinced their school's version of football was correct, had to agree on common rules just to play together. In 1848, Cambridge students drafted what became known as the Cambridge Rules, an early attempt to standardize the kicking game and settle disputes between dribbling schools and handling schools. The rules kept evolving through the 1850s, with various football clubs forming across England. Sheffield FC, founded in 1857, is recognized as the oldest football club in the world. Then came the moment historians treat as the true birth of the modern game. On October 26, 1863, representatives from 11 London area clubs and schools met at the Freemasons Tavern in London to hash out one unified set of rules. Over several meetings, they debated everything: how big the goals should be, whether tripping was allowed, and the biggest fight of all, whether players could pick up and carry the ball. The clubs that wanted handling and hacking allowed eventually walked away from the table. They'd go on to form their own governing body a few years later, rugby football, which would develop into rugby union and, eventually, American football on the other side of the Atlantic. The clubs that stayed committed to a kicking-only game. They founded the Football Association, the FA, the first governing body for the sport as we now know it. That's where the word soccer actually comes from, by the way, a slang abbreviation of association, football. This is the real founding date of organised football, 1863, London, a room full of arguing Victorian gentlemen. For its first couple of decades, the FA's football was strictly amateur, a gentleman's pursuit. But something else was happening in England at the same time: the Industrial Revolution. Factory workers in cities like Manchester, Sheffield, and Birmingham had, for the first time, a fixed number of working hours and a half-day off on Saturdays. Many factory owners and churches sponsored local football clubs as a way to keep workers occupied and build community loyalty. Several of today's biggest clubs, including Manchester United and West Ham, trace their roots directly back to works teams founded by railway or factory employees. As working-class participation exploded, the sport's character changed. Clubs began quietly paying their best players to keep them from jumping to rival teams. The FA resisted this for years, fearing it would corrupt the amateur spirit, but by 1885, they gave in and legalized professionalism. 3 years later, in 1888, 12 clubs founded the Football League, the world's first professional football league. Football went with them. British workers building railways in Argentina formed clubs. British sailors docking in Italian and Spanish ports played matches on the docks that locals watched and copied. Engineers and businessmen brought the game to Germany, to Brazil, to the Netherlands. By the early 1900s, football wasn't a British pastime anymore. It belonged to the world. In 1904, 7 European nations founded FIFA, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, to govern the now international sport. The final piece fell into place in 1930, when the first FIFA World Cup was held in Uruguay. 13 nations competed. Uruguay won, on home soil, in front of a crowd that reportedly required a police presence at the docks. From there, the growth never really stopped. Radio brought matches to millions in the mid-20th century. Television turned players like Pele and later Maradona into global celebrities, recognizable in villages that had never seen a British person in their lives. Satellite broadcasting in the 1990s and 2000s turned the Premier League and the World Cup into shared global events, watched simultaneously by billions. Simple objective of getting it into the net more times than the other side. That simplicity is exactly why it spread everywhere it did. You don't need money for equipment. You need a ball, or something that resembles one, and open space. That's the through line from Han Dynasty soldiers kicking a feather-stuffed ball, through medieval villagers brawling across the countryside, through Victorian schoolboys arguing over rulebooks, to a kid anywhere in the world today, playing barefoot in the street,